What is up? Welcome to the Walkshow podcast. I'm your host, Walker Neer. On today's episode, my super pal Chris Crabtree stops by to talk about the upcoming strategy PC game, Total War Three Kingdoms. Total War Three Kingdoms is a combination of two game franchises that we've both played for decades, so we're super excited about this new title. As always, Misha Zarins makes the music and produces the show. Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to the Walkshow podcast, folks. It's your host, Walker Neer. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about a video game, Total War Three Kingdoms. And we actually have a guest today for the first time, my dear friend, Chris Crabtree. So, Chris, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. So Crabtree and I have been playing strategy games together since we were like 6 years old. And one of the earliest games that we played is a game called Romance of the Three Kingdoms. And so this new game that's coming out is kind of the latest step in that series. A lot of people aren't familiar with it because it's kind of an obscure game made by a Japanese company called Koei. So not super popular in the West. Anyway, because of that, we don't know what you people know. So we're going to just start by explaining kind of strategy games and the genres that this game that we're talking about kind of fits into, and then we'll get more specifically into the game.
We'll start at the beginning.
Yeah, we'll start at the beginning. So yeah, the first game with the first Romance of the Three Kingdoms game I think we ever played was what? I think I played on Sega Genesis, but you played on NES?
I did rent the regular Nintendo version. But I think the Sega version was the first one that I came across.
Yeah. So whenever we say strategy games, if you've never played a strategy video game, then this whole conversation is probably not going to make a lot of sense to you as we go farther. But the easiest comparison would be like if you imagine the board game Risk, that except in a video game, right? So you've got a big map, you control different territories or countries or regions on the map or whatever that is, and you're trying to fight for control over those from the other players. Obviously in Risk it's all real people, and in these strategy games it's just a single human player versus all the AI controlled characters. Probably the most popular or largest genre of, I shouldn't say largest, probably the most popular genre of strategy game is what's called a 4X, or a turn-based kind of strategy game. The most classic example of that is Civilization. Civilization is a game where you start out with a single settler, and you found a city, and then from there you grow your empire over the course of dozens, if not hundreds of hours of gameplay. Romance is kind of a game in that vein.
Yeah, I mean, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. You select your lord. I guess you have your king of your empire.
Okay.
Just to give some background, I guess, Romance of the Three Kingdoms is a story that comes from ancient China. It's around the time period of like late hundreds, early 200s AD.
Okay.
Considered like a literature classic over there.
But isn't it true that the stories so there's a series of books called The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, which is what these games are based off of loosely. Weren't those written much later than the events that they talk about?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe that's correct.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah.
But so they're basically like ancient historical based texts.
Historical fiction, maybe. I'm sure there's a lot of embellishment.
Sure.
They're talking about a lot of different characters that they consider heroes, and almost like maybe Greek gods. Like it would be a comparison.
Yeah, almost maybe like kind of like a Chinese Bible, except not with the religious function of it. It's not people aren't worshiping anyone out of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but it's historical. But like did the dude really live in the whale in the Bible? Like probably not. So
yeah, I've heard that they have Guan Yu statues.
And Guan Yu's a character in Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Yeah.
It's one of the main characters, or one of the more powerful characters.
That it's not uncommon for like a household to have a Guan Yu statue on the mantle
Huh.
or something. I
That's
don't know how
interesting.
accurate that is.
Yeah. Huh. Fair enough. All right. So anyway, I mean, to be clear, the gameplay in these games is largely it's your turn as the player. You have your city, and your city has different stats. In the romance games, your city has like economy, so just the general how much money you have to spend on things, food. If your city is close to a water source, you had to build up your dam to help prevent against floods that could randomly occur. And then you're building up your army, and so you're spending your food and your money generally to fund that army, so that eventually you can go and attack other players. So in your turns, you're selecting different things to improve within the city, and then you have a limitation on how many actions you can assign in a given turn. And then the turn ends, and then the AI players all take their turn, and then you go again. And that's kind of how all the 4X again being like civilization games, that's how kind of all of those work.
But yeah, you have all of these, factions on the map. The main goal is to unify China. And loosely, kind of what happens is the Han Dynasty is the ruling government. It's losing power. So now all of these regional lords are trying to get theirs. Some want to become emperor. Some just want to restore the Han Dynasty, and are supporting the government already in place. So they all have like their different motivations and stuff. If you want to get into like the actual characters and their backgrounds, but anyway, you select a faction, and that kind of dictates where you're at on the map. And yeah, like you're using all of those resources to improve your cities and basically trying to conquer your enemies.
Yeah. And you can do things like make alliances and make trade partnerships and all sorts of stuff with the different factions. So it's not that you just have to, you don't only attack the other players like you would in a game like Risk that I had mentioned at the beginning, but in general, ultimately the goal is going to be to conquer everything. So that's kind of a brief introduction. I mean, I think that's a good introduction to what romance is.
Yeah.
So then that's kind of turn-based or 4X or whatever is kind of one broad category of strategy game. The other broad category that we wanted to talk about is what's called RTS, or real-time strategy. And those are strategy games in which there is no turn. Both players are playing in real time simultaneously. And so because of that, those games require a lot more mechanical skill than a turn-based game, because a turn-based game, think of it more like chess, right? You're able to just look at the board, think about it, make a decision, and it doesn't matter how fast you move the chess piece. The move is the move. That's how turn-based games work. Real-time games, it's a lot more about how fast you can execute commands. And so, probably the most famous example of that kind of game would be like StarCraft. The Total War series is kind of a combination or a blend of turn-based and RTS. And so that's a series that we've played for a really long time. And I think the first one we played was Medieval Total War 1, or was it the Shogun?
Yeah, the longest one we've played, I guess, would probably be Medieval. Longest, I guess, most played time.
Right.
But yeah, that would be the one that we put the most hours in, like, I guess, early on. I messed around with the first Shogun, but I never played it for very long.
And so, to clarify, the Total War games, so the Romance of the Three Kingdoms games, and there's, Tree said earlier, we started playing on Sega Genesis. They have new ones now that have come out within the last 2 years for PC. So that series has continued on for decades. The Total War series also has taken or been around for a really long time. The romance games, though, are always set in China in the time period that Crabtree described earlier with the characters, because they're all based on that series of books that Tree referenced. The Total War series is different in that it selects a period of history, and then the game is focused around that period. So like when we say medieval, well, they have a Total War series of games called Medieval that is all based in Europe in the Middle Ages, and it's all knights and feudal times and that kind of stuff. Then they also have another series that's Shogun, that's all based in Japan. There's one that's Napoleon, that's based in France, Europe, and around the Napoleonic times. And so those games, the Total War series is not tied to one specific thing throughout the series. Instead, each game kind of anchors on one period and stays there. So I think that Medieval is probably the one we played the most. I think Shogun is probably considered the best of the Total War series, though.
Yeah, Shogun too.
Yeah.
I definitely put a lot of hours into that.
Mm-hmm.
Rome 2.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Rome 1, I guess, also.
Yeah. So the battles in Classic, I just kind of described how it was real time in the Total War series. It kind of walked me through, how would you describe the difference between battles in like a game like Civilization or Romance versus battles in like a Total War series?
Well, even though you in Romance you would go to a separate map, I guess the newer versions you're kind of playing out battles on the campaign map. That's kind of a change that they've made.
Okay.
But you're still taking turns.
Right.
It's kind of important on when you engage the enemy, because you want to like move into position and then be able to execute an attack on that turn, right? You don't want to give them the initiative to have them attack you, so you're still kind of playing to that turn.
Kind of like in chess, like if you moved if you moved a piece into a position where it can attack something, but it could also be attacked. Well, if you move it, your turn ends. Now the other person's just going to take your piece because you didn't get to go again.
Exactly.
So that kind
exactly.
of idea. Okay.
Yeah. But then in the real time, you're both sides are doing the same, moving at the same rate and executing their strategies at the same time.
Okay.
Or trying to, I guess. There's no pause there, where this person moves and then you don't.
Right. So in the Total War games, the battles, I think, are a lot more intense because it is real time. So all those tactics that Tree was just describing, I mean, still come into play, right? You're still choosing when to engage and trying to initiate or utilize different tactics. However, because it's real time, you're also in the moment. You've got a line of spearmen and archers that are marching forward, and then maybe off on the side you've got cavalry that you're flanking with, and that's all happening simultaneously.
Right. And there's a lot of timing to it. Like if you're trying to execute like a flanking maneuver, since it's all playing out real time, you kind of have to decide when you want to send those troops in. It's not like you're going to get a turn and be like, okay, now I'm going to move my horses over here.
Right.
It's you kind of like have to know when to send them.
Right. And to be clear, the thing is in a Civilization game, I keep using chess, but I think that's probably just the easiest example. If you don't, if you haven't played Civilization, the combat in Civilization is like knocking over a pawn with a knight in chess, right? Yeah, you took the square, but it's not actually visually satisfying in any way. It's just two static pieces that don't really react to the fact that they've been taken over, right? Nothing happens. In the Total War games, it's fully realized 3D animated battles where each, a spearman unit or a unit of horsemen is not a symbol or a single guy on a horse. It's 100 guys or 60 guys or whatever, all on horses, and you get incredibly badass battle scenes where you get motherfuckers getting skewed. You know what I mean? You can get people get their heads cut off because you can download these blood packs for the games that add another layer of violence. And deeply satisfying. You don't get that in the traditional strategy games.
I mean, you're talking about hundreds of character models, all on the same screen, all fighting it out,
right?
Different lines engaging, right? You have your different troop types, So, you may have arrows coming over the top, horses coming in from the side.
Right.
You got your infantry lines engaging. There's a lot of positioning
Right.
and stuff going on there.
Yeah. Well, and so like, again, the reason I bring that up is just that not only is the Total War series satisfying because it kind of blends two genres that are really fun and kind of, I think to some extent, kind of gets the best of both worlds out of those genres, because it allows you to take your time and think about and be as plotting as you want in your kind of macro strategy.
I mean, you feel like an armchair general. I
Yes,
mean,
thank you.
it puts you there. And when you're doing the empire building on the campaign map, right,
Hmm.
you kind of feel like that emperor, like I'm working on all my stuff, building up my resources and everything.
Yeah.
But then you can go into the battles and then get that strategy, tactical,
Right. Right. Yes, thank you.
now I'm outmaneuvering you on
Yes.
the battlefield.
Yeah. So it gives you all of that. But the other thing that it does, that again, in a game like Civilization, you don't get, and honestly, you don't get satisfying battle animations. And again, honestly, in games like StarCraft or Command and Conquer, you don't you don't see huge armies in those games. Like you might see, 50 versus 50 as far as unit counts on the screen in a game like StarCraft, which to be clear is a lot of units, but it's 50 on 50. In the Total War series, they're literally rendering 1,000 versus 1,000 on a single battlefield. So just the scope and the scale of it is just unmatched in anything else I've seen. So beyond the tactical and strategic, goodness of it, it's also just cool looking. I mean,
Yeah.
the Braveheart fan in you, right, is just satisfied by it.
Well, I mean, yeah, I find myself just, role playing a lot more than probably most people. Or
Yeah.
when I'm on the battlefield, I'll actually just march my troops and have them walk, to conserve their energy.
Yeah.
A lot of people are just like, oh, I want them to fight right away. So they're just running all over the place,
Right.
trying to make the battle finish.
Right.
But I kind of find it fun to, slow it down, march them up, like form the lines,
Right. Yeah, create those cinematic moments. And that's another thing that another place that romance differs from the other games is that the other games, even the Total War series in general, and Civilization and those type of games, have really an emphasis on you are the leader of a nation. So the character that you're playing is effectively a nation, and the other characters that you interact with are other nations. In romance, though, because it's a nation fractured into just city states, basically, with warlords, there's a more significant emphasis on individual people and characters.
Yeah.
I've always thought that was interesting.
And I think a lot of that comes from the story.
Yeah.
They have friendships and sworn enemies. It's like the most drama-filled epic that you can think
Yeah.
of. There's assassinations, betrayals.
Right.
So all of these characters are interacting and have their different reasons for doing, whatever they do.
Yeah, the stories are about the books are, of course, not about just military fights. The books are much more about the interpersonal drama between all these different characters. And what made me think to bring that up was when you talked about the role playing, and you were talking about it in the sense of like, when you're leading your army, you want to lead the army how you imagine that would have really happened in real life, right?
Yeah.
And so that's one form of role playing. Well, the other form that I think you and I have always been pretty into with the romance games is that there is all these individual characters, and they all do have little personalities. And even though it's all computer controlled and it's not really that dynamic, especially in old versions of the game, you still develop relationships with these individual characters. And there's guys that have, shady face, and it's like, I'm not dealing with you, shady face, and you kick him out of the empire. But really, it's just it's not actually a guy, but it feels like it is.
It's like that. XCOM does a great job of it.
Yeah.
Where
Yeah.
you just start caring about your dudes. They're the ones that fight the battles. They're leading the armies. They're developing your economy or whatever. And so, over the years, it's like this guy has been helping me build my empire for like 10 years. Like,
Yeah.
that's my guy, you know?
Right.
And so you don't want them to, you know, die or, you know, something bad to happen to them.
Yeah. Well, and so then the other thing that they can do is the reason I say shady face is because they can betray you and they can do things that are not in line with what you had in mind when you gave them orders or gave them resources or whatever. So
that's an interesting thing that you say there, because that's going to be a big thing in the Total War Three Kingdoms, right? They're going to try and capture the characters betraying their leaders, right? You can do a lot of spying. I guess that we'll probably talk about at some point. In the Sega version, there was always old school version. There was always like a loyalty meter.
Oh, right.
So you could like kind of tell like what they were doing.
Yeah.
And I remember in the Genghis Khan where Shady Face comes in, there was no loyalty meter, so we were basing all that on just what they look like.
So what are you talking about? There's another game made by that same Japanese developer Koei called Genghis Khan, Clan of the Grey Wolf. That was a game in the 90s that's very similar to Romance. And yeah, to his point, there's no loyalty meter in Genghis Khan, so there is just Shady Face. I will say, I don't care if there's a loyalty meter or not. I still judge faces. And that's not just in this game. That's in life.
Yeah.
In life, you might not do me wrong, but if you have a shady face, there's an arm's length. I can't help it. That's
like
who I am.
The standard. You can kind of tell when it's below the standard.
Yeah.
You just get this feeling.
Are you talking about someone's face? Or are you talking about the game?
Yeah.
Okay.
Someone's face.
Yeah, I don't know. And I've been wrong. I've met people that have shady face that I'm like, I think you're shady, and then they're not, and that's great for them and good for me because they didn't fuck me over. But shady face is real, and it has to be considered in video games and in life, and that's the life lesson for today, I think.
But back then, shady face was kind of like, it was happening because they only had so many graphics that they could use.
Oh, you mean back in the 90s?
Yeah, the technology was limited, right? So
I thought you meant in historical times more people had shady face and it was more prevalent.
That might be true.
It could be.
That could be.
Yeah,
true.
I'm glad I'm modern.
That's...
So I don't know if I had explained this at the top of the show or not, but whatever. Basically, the reason that we've taken all this time to explain to you what Romance of the Three Kingdoms is and what the Total War series is and what strategy games in general are, the newest game coming out is called Total War Three Kingdoms. So it is yet another blend, right? Another combination of those two games. So the company that makes Total War, as I explained earlier, they choose these different historical periods. So they've done Japan, they've done France, they've done Europe. Well, now they're doing the Three Kingdoms period of China that Crabtree described earlier, that these books and these other games are based on. And so we are incredibly excited, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, since we were kids, we always wanted the Romance games to be more than they were, because as cool as they are pretty limited, and they haven't really changed a lot over the 20 years, just minor changes. And the Total War series is so cool, but it just doesn't have that same nostalgia that Romance does. And so we always talked about how awesome it would be if they would make a Total War Romance game, but never thought it possible. Total War is made by a studio out of Britain, I think. Like I said before, Romance made out of Japan.
Yeah.
Didn't think they'd ever collaborate.
And I think really perfect timing too.
Yeah, the technology.
Right.
Where the technology is now is good. If they would have done it a decade ago, it probably would have been shit.
And considering like their past versions of games, like they have steadily tried new mechanics.
Yeah. The Total War games innovate a lot from version to version.
They try new mechanics and kind of work out different things, keep good things, get rid of bad things that they don't like.
Yeah.
Well, most recently, I guess the last Total War game, Warhammer.
Yeah.
You get a lot of hero characters, right? So then moving into Three Kingdoms, they've already kind of played around with how heroes work.
Yeah, because there's, like we were saying, there's such an emphasis on characters in the Romance games, which wasn't traditionally in Total War, but the last Total War game did introduce that. So yeah, that's a good point. So they do kind of have some groundwork laid already to introduce this.
And it's Creative Assembly, right?
That's the company that makes Total War's Creative Assembly. Yep, that's correct. And well, so that's the developer published by Sega. So yeah, so we've been reading up and watching videos and stuff from the developer on the new game. It's coming out, I think, in early March of this year.
Right now it's March 7th, I think.
Okay, so just a little bit out. The first video, excuse me, that I watched was on diplomacy, and the system that stood out to me right away was it's common in the Total War games that, you know, you take over more than one country or town or region or whatever, right? So you have maybe multiple cities that are producing different things and building different armies and have different concerns that you're managing. Well, that's true in Total War as well. However, in the Total War games, or excuse me, that's true in this new Romance one as well, this new Three Kingdoms game as well. However, there's a vassal system by which you can have an AI player effectively be your vassal, your subordinate, yet they're still independent of you. So they're not actually a part of your nation. They're their own nation. However, they can't make decisions like going to war without your approval. And they pay some sort of tax to you or something.
Okay.
And vassal systems have been in Romance games, and I think even in Total War games before. But the level of that you can negotiate around the vassal terms, I thought was really interesting. So for example, the superior, the dominant faction in this video I was watching, they had a vassal, and the vassal had a resource that they wanted, but they couldn't just demand it from them because, again, they don't actually own the vassal's state, right? They just, I guess, I don't know, have military dominance over it. I don't know. It's kind of, I've never really understood the vassal relationships, but in history, I mean. But anyway, so they want to trade with the vassal. Well, the vassal in this region of territory, that's the primary source of food that this guy controls, right? And so he asks a pretty steep price for it that the superior dominant faction doesn't want to pay.
Right.
But instead of just being able to offer money or troops or something like that in exchange for the food that they want, instead they can offer terms such as, we promise we will never annex you into our empire in the future. So you basically are negotiating their future autonomy if they'll give you the food, right?
That's cool.
Or you can negotiate, if, say, you're trading with a vassal from another faction, you can say, hey, let's trade, and if you decide you want to break free and go independent of your dominant faction, I'll support you in that war.
Oh, wow.
So I'm not declaring war on them openly, but if you do, I'll have your back.
Wow.
And I was like, wow, that's crazy that you can negotiate those kinds of terms. Like,
that's really awesome, because that allows for just a lot of dynamics to change.
yeah,
I mean, you could really spend some time like turtling up, kind of building up your base power.
yeah,
But at the same time, be reaching out to all of these other people
yeah,
and kind of securing future help.
right.
So like when you're ready to make your move, now all of a sudden, all of these people maybe join your side.
Right.
And now, something that wasn't foreseen is now like a big problem, for some people.
Yeah. So and you'll have to forgive me because I didn't take notes on this specific part, but so one of the most powerful characters in all of the Romance games is a guy named Cao Cao. Cao is how that's spelled. But Cao Cao has an ability in the game where he can passively influence the desires that other nations have, so that he can basically align others' political interests with his own.
Oh.
Without them really being aware that that's happening.
He kind of has like some sort of
like subversion.
Yeah, diplomacy extra skill.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and that would come from like the story. Like he's, this guy that's always like in other people's business, kind of like working things behind the scenes.
Kind of like like Littlefinger in the Game of Thrones
There you go.
stories or something, right?
The spider.
The spider, yeah. Well, yeah, both of them. Spider's more informational, I guess. Whatever.
So,
I don't mean to debate that.
Yeah. They're messing with stuff.
But yeah, someone who's Some Roger Stone, you know, there's your there's your modern reference. It's someone who's not actually a politician, but is meddling in shit, you know.
How
Anyway.
about LeBron James? Can we say that?
Yeah, can you say LeBron James? Yeah, you can say anything. So that was one thing I thought was really neat. Another thing is they have this feature they call a quick deal menu. So the quick deal menu. So normally when you negotiate with factions in these games, you have to open up a menu that shows a list of factions, click on the faction you want. That then brings up a new screen that shows all the various terms and offerings that you could possibly want to negotiate. And then you select them and then make offers and go back and forth. Well, they have this thing called a quick deal menu, which basically, like, say you want to form a trade agreement, right? And you want to form as many trade agreements as you can, I should say. Well, it will, via the quick deal menu, show you a quick hit list of all of the factions that are willing to make a deal with you right away. Like, so you don't have to go hunting to see who likes you, and you don't have to spend time clicking through 10 screens to get to the thing, to get to the deal. If there's something that they're willing to do just off the top, you can just click it and go. So you very quickly...
That's so good.
Yes.
Because so many times, like, you know, playing diplomacy, you're having to click on each country. Like, well, do you want to trade? Do you want to trade? No.
Right. Or do you want to be allies or a ceasefire or whatever the different
And then
terms
after
are.
clicking on 15 different people, maybe nobody wanted to ally.
Yeah, exactly. And
then
but there's no way to know until you slog through that shit, right? Yeah, with this, it just is like, all right, if there's people who are willing to play ball, then it's just going to tell you and you can just get on with your life. And then you can get into more nuanced negotiations if you choose. And there's still an opportunity for those to work. So it's also not as if quick deal is the only deals that could work.
Yeah.
It's easy.
And the diplomacy options, that's huge.
Yes.
Like, so for so long, it's just been the standard go to war, trade, make peace.
Right. Yeah, there's not a lot of creativity that you can insert into the negotiations in these games.
Yeah.
I'm sure this still won't be everything we've ever wanted, but it's
a big
step.
Yeah, there you go.
So there's another common in these games is alliances. Now you could say like a trade agreement is a trade alliance of sorts, and then there's military alliances where you agree that if you or your military ally get attacked, then you'll both go to war on each other's behalf. So that all still exists in this. However, there's also something called a coalition. And the coalition is interesting because it's not a military alliance. However, it offers some of the benefits that otherwise would. So one of the biggest benefits it offers is map sharing.
Oh, okay.
So when you enter a coalition, now you have on the map, you can view everything that your coalition members can.
Okay.
The other way it works is it introduces democratic decisions within the coalition. So if you've got 3 factions in a coalition and there's someone else that wants to join, the 3 existing coalitions have to vote on whether or not they want the new faction to join, and majority rules.
Huh. Okay.
So it introduces some interesting dynamics for how you improve your relations, because the longer you're in coalitions with factions, you get a ever accumulating and compounding bonus to your relationship with them.
Okay.
However, if a war goes on with coalition members, now I don't mean within the same coalition, but if coalition A member of coalition A wants to attack someone else, all of coalition A isn't required to go to war. So you can still engage in private wars that are independent of the rest of the coalition.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's good too. There's just a lot of things that should be in there are now starting to make their,
Yeah, well, to your point earlier, the timing of it is, as much as I would love to say I wish this game would have come out in 2002, right? Probably not, because it's probably dog shit. So glad that we have it now. So there are still military alliances too, which I kind of just already described. So in military alliances, there's also this democracy system where the member factions are voting on things. But in the military alliance, if military alliance A votes to go to war with someone, right? And let's say that it's Alliance B, so it's another group of factions. Then they vote on it to go to war, and if you vote different than the majority, you get kicked out of the alliance.
Okay. All right.
So it kind of makes it so that your vote has to also take into consideration what happens if it doesn't, if your vote's not the majority. Like, are you really okay with the outcome you're voting for?
Right. Right.
You know, which might sound obvious, but I guess, so a better example of it is if you're in an alliance that's at war and your alliance votes for peace, and the majority votes for peace, and you voted that you wanted to stay in war, you'll be removed from the alliance. They all go peace, and you maintain at war status with everyone that you were at war with already, except now you're by yourself.
Well, I mean, that can work both ways, right? I mean, yeah, it alienates you or takes you out of the alliance.
Yeah.
But maybe that's something that you want to do anyway in the future.
Yeah.
So you go ahead and do that. And then you can continue that war. Maybe you're confident you can take over that country or that city.
Yeah.
So you could continue that war and take over that city. They don't get it, and now you're not allied with them, so you could then attack them later.
Well, and so earlier I was talking about, that's a really interesting position on that, or point on that, because earlier I was talking about how you could negotiate that you wouldn't annex a vassal in the future, right? Well, the only accountability that exists for you not doing that, if you said you wouldn't, is you have a trustworthy rating, right, that your faction or your ruler has. And so if you were to tell a vassal, we won't annex you in the future, and then in the future you did annex them, your trust rating would take a hit, right? So now other factions will be less likely to work with you because they don't believe you.
Yeah.
So
your word is bond.
It is, right. So I wonder if in the military alliance, with what you just said, so if we're allies and I just leave the alliance just because I choose to leave for no reason, that might impact the trust rating.
Yeah, you're a punk.
But if you leave because you vote to stay in the war that they didn't, that gives you a way to leave that is politically favorable.
Correct.
And maybe, maybe it's like you said, maybe you think you can win the war, or maybe the war is actually with a faction that borders one of your allies or previous allies, but you're not actually in it anyway, so they're not really a direct threat to you, so you can stay in the war, but it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And you get out of the alliance, and that's politically advantageous. Yeah, that's really interesting. I was just thinking about how it could fuck you, but
but yeah, and now everyone still thinks you're trustworthy.
Yeah,
like, hey, I'm down to ride.
Honestly, and we can't explain it because we could do a 2-hour podcast and couldn't explain this other game I'm now going to mention, but Game of Thrones that everyone knows from TV, and Tree and I are actually hipsters with Game of Thrones. We read the books, so I just pushed my glasses up my nose after I said that. There's a board game for that we've played that's insanely complicated and pretty fun, but it reminds me of that. Like, it's that level of like manipulation that you can get into that's pretty rare in a game playing against computer players.
Well, like in a board game, there's no, you basically just make up the diplomacy rules however you want to.
Well, and that's why
it.
In a board game you're playing with real people, right?
Yeah.
So there's also, it's different because you're having to negotiate personalities that don't exist quite in the same way in AI.
Yeah.
So the next thing I guess to talk about was spies. So they're in these Total War games and to some extent in the romance games, there's always been espionage and spying, and it looks like it's pretty crazy. And like this looks like the craziest version of spies I've seen.
Yeah. So you hire your characters or generals or whatever, and then you can set them as a spy, send them to another faction, and they will actually infiltrate that faction to where the AI now thinks they're in their faction and can control them.
Yeah, you basically like fire him.
Yeah.
And so for as far as they're considered, he's no longer a member of your faction when in fact he really is your spy.
Right. And so
crazy.
So the AI will take their turn, do whatever they want with him, but you still get a turn and you can still control him. So you can either, do things to enhance your cover, so that way the other faction trusts you more. Or you can choose to spend that cover points to do different things that will, favor your faction.
Right. Yeah, it seems wild. Well, so I also saw that those spies that you fake fire and then get hired somewhere else, because they are all individual characters, like we've talked about in romance, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a faceless spy; it's actually a character in the game that has his own stats and personality and everything. They can actually just choose to betray you and legit join the faction.
Yeah.
That you
Like maybe their best friend is over there.
right.
And they're like, hey, I kind of just want to stay over here.
Right.
They may do that.
Right. And then the other thing they can do is they can actually break off and start their own faction
Yeah.
as this free agent. And there's a level where you can put them into the other faction, and even though you would lose them as your spy, you can convince them to start their own faction to screw over the other person.
Yeah, you can instigate like a civil war.
Right. But they might do that on their own, or it could be something that you tried to orchestrate. Like,
Yeah.
just crazy.
So I hope that, all of these sound great. I hope there's a way that maybe you could influence the loyalty of the other characters. Like maybe you can give them gifts or something.
That's pretty true. In classic romance
or
games,
equipment.
you could. Yeah.
I think there was like equipment slots.
Yeah. I bet there is, because it would be, if it's Genghis Khan and we're just doing shady face is the only measure you have to go on, then that's bad.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just a ton of possible actions for the spies, and I did see a classic Total War action for the spies to poison the food supplies of the enemy faction.
Hey.
That's still in there. That's my default, is to poison the shit out of these people.
Yeah.
And I still plan on doing that.
Yeah, yeah. So if you were, say he became a commander.
Yeah.
And it was like, had his army for the other faction. Yeah, you could poison their food, kill their troops, then move in and, have an easier battle maybe.
I don't know. Now we've talked about Game of Thrones, so it's on the brain, but it makes me think of the. I haven't watched much of the show, but I actually did catch the scene where Arya. Oh yeah, I guess spoiler alert for Game of Thrones people, but it's already happened, folks. Anyway, where Arya betrays the Freys.
Oh yeah.
And pretends to be the dad or whatever, the king or whatever.
Isn't that crazy?
And
That's
then
crazy.
It's really good in the book.
Yeah.
But seeing it on the show is actually really satisfying. It's just like, because I actually didn't recognize the scene when it first started, so I didn't really understand exactly what I was seeing, because it was just like a YouTube clip.
Right.
And then when it all played out, I was just like, oh man.
And it feels so good too, because Arya is like, part of the Starks. The Starks get shit on.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yeah.
And to have her like trained to be an assassin and come back.
That's how I imagine that I'm much like Arya when I play these games. You know what I mean? I'm a victim, and people have hurt me, and the only way I can exact my revenge is to poison them all to death. So, and then I watch videos also. So, we talked about the diplomacy, we've talked about spies. As far as the battles go, the battles looked like the traditional Total War battles that we've described, where you've got your different, literally thousands of troops rendered at a time, or hundreds. That all looks pretty much intact to be what you expect from a Total War game, but I don't want them to change that. That's the thing that Total War does really well.
Yeah.
It's all the campaign map, the non-battle stuff. The Total War is done fine, but that's what the romance games are exclusively. That side of this Total War game seems to have been heavily influenced by romance. Like it does. In looking at it, it does not look like a Total War game to me. It looks like a romance game.
Yeah. I don't know if you want to mention, what was that team that Creative Assembly took in that did like Company of Heroes or whatever?
Relic.
And they did the Warhammer IP, right?
So Relic made the Dawn of War Warhammer 40K RTS games.
Yeah.
Which is also Dawn of War 2, Dawn of War 3. Then they also made Company of Heroes 1 and 2, which are RTS games that are actually, in a rare treat, a break from the genre norms that StarCraft and Command and Conquer established in the 90s.
Yeah.
But yes, Relic, who made these other RTS games, was absorbed or bought out by Creative Assembly.
They work together. They do the Warhammer stuff, and now this is their first game together outside of that familiar IP, I guess.
Yeah, but it really kind of boosted their ability. I think Relic coming into Creative Assembly helped the RTS side of the Total War games get even better.
Yeah. Something like just bringing in people that are familiar with those mechanics and have been doing their own thing. Like it could only, I think, help. And I guess they, did a lot of that. Maybe that was part of the hero thing, is bringing that in.
So in classic romance games, a big thing that you spend your time doing in your turns is taking these different officers and generals that are in your nation and assigning them to tasks such as, hey, Tom, you go and work on the farms, and Bill, you're going to go train the troops or whatever, right? And
do you want to try the Chinese names?
Sure. Cao Cao, you're going to go train the troops.
Like just butcher all the names.
And no, dude, in watching the videos, it's humiliating how I don't know how to say the names.
Well, it's Cao, you know that one.
I do. That's the reason I keep using it. Because it's the only one that I feel any amount of confidence in.
Dong Zhuo.
Yeah,
it's tough.
Yeah, that's
a tough one.
Yeah.
Lu Bu,
that's a nice one.
That's a real short one.
Liu Bao is the thing is, the problem is that when we try and pronounce the names, it quickly sounds like I'm trying to do racist impressions of Asian voices, and I'm not.
What's funny is that some of the videos on there, they don't even know, and they say Cao Cao instead of Cao Cao.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
I mean, not
my sophistication shows again.
It's just just random people that are not familiar with the stuff. But
yeah, I've heard some on the Total War videos that are actually from the Creative Assembly.
Yeah.
They're on point.
Yeah.
It's the thing is that it's just because it's not a Latin-based language, of course, right? And so the problem is that the character combinations don't make the same sound that you think. So like ZH is actually like a ch, I think, or like a j noise, not z.
Yeah.
Earlier I was talking about how in the romance games you assign officers to these different tasks. Well, that has come into the new Total War game as well, where you have these regions on the map and these little cities that, like, a group of cities will make up a province. And each of these little regional cities within a province has a static resource. Like maybe it has a copper mine or a silk trading place or a farm, right? Or whatever that resource is. You can assign your generals and your officers to work those resources to improve them. So it does retain that classic romance mechanic.
Good. That's good. That's real good.
Yes.
It's really important for building that relationship with the character.
Yes.
Yeah,
well, and it's just, again, like I was nervous about this game being a Total War game with the romance theme, and instead I think what we're going to get, at least from what I've seen, obviously not out yet, but is a romance game kind of in the theme of Total War. If that makes sense, not to be ambiguous.
It seems like they're really trying to embrace that what it was and kind of just bring that in.
Yes.
And a romance game that's kind of Total War-ish.
Yeah.
But the romance game that we've always wanted.
Right.
Is how it feels.
Well, and I think it's a risk to some extent, and one that's commendable. But I mean, it's the Romance of the Three Kingdoms IP. On the one hand, it's from China, which is one of the biggest population centers on the planet. So to say that it's not popular or not well known is crazy. But in the West, it's not.
Yeah.
And so the Total War series is traditionally focused on historical periods that are more popular in the West, and this isn't. And they're not shying away from that at all. They're leaning into the differences of this, and they're leaning into the oddities of it, and I love it.
Yeah.
Like, I can't wait.
Yeah, and I mean, you got the base game, and I'm thinking about DLCs and, adding more officers, more factions.
Yes.
I think it's going to ship without naval battles.
Okay.
So unfortunately, you know, like there's a huge naval battle in the story, like with
Yes.
Red Cliff.
Yes.
And you know, so you won't get to do that right away, but I'm pretty sure that's going to come.
Right.
I mean, it's such a big part of that story.
Yes.
That they're probably waiting for like a DLC to release the naval stuff and
Yeah.
make sure everything's good before we bring in something else. And
So one game genre, or not genre, but game series that I have not mentioned at all because it's not this type of gameplay at all, but that people who may think I've never heard of Romance or of the Three Kingdoms, or I'm not familiar with that at all, you might be if you ever played a Dynasty Warriors game. Dynasty Warriors is an action game series where you run around as a guy and fight, like hand-to-hand fight, you know, other troops or whatever. That the lore of those games, though, is all based off of the same series of stories. And
most
the characters are
people
the same.
have like encountered that one first.
Yes.
The Dynasty Warriors and yeah, so some might even not even know of the strategy game.
Yes,
Like their whole impression of it is just Dynasty Warriors.
Right, right. Well, Dynasty Warriors was an arcade game.
Yeah.
It's a lot more accessible. You know, you pick up the controller, you press the A button, the B button, you hit, and you jump, and you run around, and it's easier to understand.
Yell Musou.
Yeah, you do yell Musou. In fact, you yell Musou so much they made an entire genre of game called Musou that now exists. That is basically Dynasty Warriors with different IPs.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't mean to get into Dynasty Warriors. I just thought it was worth mentioning. If you've played Dynasty Warriors, you actually do know what the Romance of the Three Kingdoms stories at least are roughly about, because when you said the naval battle, that's what reminded me of it, because in playing the strategy games, that naval battle was never in my view.
Yeah.
But in the Dynasty Warriors games, you always have to play through the big naval battle where all the boats are on fire.
Yep.
So
that's Red Cliff. Yeah.
There you go.
I mean, I'm just really looking forward to it. I'm excited, and I'm kind of on that line there where it's like I want to be really, really excited, but then it's like, you know, I don't want to overload it with expectation either and like, be disappointed in some way. But everything I've seen from it, it seems like it's going to be everything I want it to be. And I don't know, just looking forward to playing it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And obviously, as anyone listening should be very clear on, this is not a sponsored topic, right? Creative Assembly doesn't know that I exist or that Chris exists.
They should, though.
They should, and maybe they will if you people like and subscribe on wherever you're downloading this podcast from. But my point just being that this isn't a solicitation from us, because we're not being, you know, we're not sponsored. But as a fan, I am just outright saying call to action. If you like strategy games, if you like Civilization, or if you've played the Total War games, or even if you've just played StarCraft or Command and Conquer and you've never played turn-based strategy games, give this game a serious look and frankly just buy it and give it a shot, because it looks amazing and I wanted this so much and I want more later, because as good as it's going to be, I'll find things that I want more of. And so the only way they'll make another one is if it sells.
So I have to say that every Total War game that's came out, I've paid full price for. That I've purchased because I wanted to continue, and we've talked about it. If we continue to support them, maybe someday they will do a Romance Total War game. And it's here. It's here. It's
when I saw the announcement, it was utter disbelief. Anyway, well, this has been super fun. Obviously, this is my first podcast with a guest. So, Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join me.
Pleasure.
We're out. Have a good one.